Welcome to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Wendy Koenig. Wendy, thank you so much for being on the show.
I am so excited to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I would love for you to start with how did you get into writing?
I grew up an only child living out in the country. I got lonely. I started scribbling little stories, and before you know it, I started getting those published when I was maybe a teenager, a few little ones in the newspaper, and it went from there.
Nice, nice. So what was that like so as a teen, you see your piece, whatever you put together and it's in the paper for everybody to see, not just you, and not just your family, but your friends' parents, everybody, school teachers, and they're all seeing this. So what was that like?
Well, the school teachers liked it. My classmates, I got a little bit of guff from them, but they're kids, right? So what can you do? Yeah, it was exciting. Yeah.
That is, yeah, yeah. So did you follow a passion with journalism in that way, or how did that continue to evolve?
I tried journalism. I really, really, really hated it. I did. Yeah. Real life did not interest me at all. It had to be, anything that was in this head of mine, I had to pursue. So, yeah, didn't go well.
Okay, so nonfiction, technical writing, maybe not so much. So how did the fiction continue to evolve? How did that start to take shape?
Well, I eventually went to university at University of Iowa and attended their very famous writers program there. And and then got a degree in English. Followed that up when I moved to Maine, and just kept writing and getting published.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. So, what was one of the first pieces that you did, after graduation and moving and so forth? Like, what kind of pieces were you writing and exploring at that time?
Science fiction. I was
Ah,
a
nice.
huge science fiction buff, and I grew up on Heinlein and also Andre Norton and all of my mother's books. So science fiction was my first true love. So yeah.
So, what was that like then? So, part of writing sci-fi really is not just strong character development, because you really need that in all facets, but you
Hmm.
need to really create a solid world. If the
Hmm.
world itself is not believable and and essentially a form of being mutable, because you really
Hmm.
want it to kind of feel like
Hmm.
another character in its own way. It's something that all the characters have to bounce up against and deal with, and in and of itself, it's creating that feeling for the reader. What was that like writing it?
It was hard. My first science fiction book took me 10 or 12 years to finally work through all the different versions. And I made the mistake of giving it to a writer friend of mine to help me edit it. And she just tore it to pieces. And in the end, I hated it. So I went back to an earlier version and rewrote it and rewrote it. And finally it was there. But yes, you're right. It takes a lot of research, because as a science fiction writer, you have to extrapolate the here and now into the future. And if you don't do that well, you pause readers' believability.
Mhm.
And once your reader doesn't believe, they chuck the book.
Very true.
Yeah,
Very, very true.
yeah.
So, so when you were building out, you've gone through the process, you've written this first draft, you got some feedback and realized that it's not really honoring the vision or the voice that you were intending. So you go back to the drawing board and essentially you go back through some rewrites to get
Hmm.
there.
Hmm.
But when you were first working on this sci-fi and recognizing this is what you want to create, did you have an idea of what this world ought to be and just it all fleshed out so nice and beautiful? Or was it one of those things that you went, I just need to write a little bit and say, come back and fill this in, and keep writing and come back and fill this part in? So what was that part like?
Well, that's exactly what I do. I write in layers, right? I'll do the rough draft, just scribble it as fast as I can. It comes out maybe 40,000 words, maybe 50,000 words. Then I go back and I flesh out the world, and my outlines are crazy. They're like that.
Nice.
I don't make an outline until after I've finished my rough draft. and then I go back and I make an outline based on what I've already written. Right.
Talk
So I'm
about
not,
that.
well, I write down the different scenes, and then as I'm writing and I have to go back, then I put in extra notes here beside it and underneath it, and here on the back you can see where I've scribbled pretty good. And I go through maybe, I don't know, tons of revisions on that outline. I'll go through the outline, and then I'll go back and I'll start from the outline again, making corrections in, and then I just keep making corrections and building it and building it and building it until it's where I want it.
So with the outline, it sounds to me like what that does is that it gives you another perspective instead of not just reading the book and reading the manuscript as you have it, but it almost kind of sounds like it gives you like a crosshatch and saying, okay, I am intending this chapter, this scene to go through to do X and Y. So is it doing that? Or do I have a gap here where I thought I was addressing, this particular nuance, and wait, where did I address that? Oh no, it's down here in chapter 10. And that's the next time I talk about it. I need to bring it up a little bit more. I need to just weave a little bit more so it doesn't feel like it's so out of the blue. It sounds like what that outlining does after the fact is that it helps you to kind of quality check in a sense.
That's exactly what it does. I have found places like that where things are just totally out of proportion. It also helps me gauge the tension level in the story. I don't care how good of a story you have. It can be the best story in the world, but if it's not technically correct, by technically I mean if it doesn't build out the way you need it to, if it doesn't have enough tension, if you've mishandled where you introduce something or somebody, or you drop ideas or threads, subplots, you just leave them hanging, it's not good. It'll never be good if you don't address all those things.
So then if let's push on this outline idea, because I really can see how this would add value to any storyline, but really when you're building out worlds, when you're dealing with or mystery, suspense, and thrillers, when you need to be dropping things at certain times and not dropping certain things at certain times. I can see how this structuring would really be helpful. So when you have this and you do see where something is needed, but it might re-rack some of this outline.
Yeah.
Would you talk a little bit about how you have worked through that?
Oh, well, I can give you a really good example. This book on the slide, it started out way different. It was written different. The rough draft, it was a completely different story. It started out well, not to ruin anything, but it started as a serial killer story, which is a bad idea for the first book in a series, because where do you go from there, right? So I had to take out everything there. It started out with multiple points of view, and I didn't like that. And plus it's a mystery. I can't have the killer's point of view, and I couldn't do this, that, and the other. And so by the time I got done fixing it and rearranging it, I had to shift a lot of the scenes from way over here, scene 36, all the way up to 22, and shift around. And then, then you've got a hodgepodge ugly mess, right? so then you have to go back through and you read it all, and read it out loud to your cats if you have to. They're very strict judges. And then the story has to flow smooth, and yeah, it's a mess.
Okay, so you've hit on a few things that I think are really important. First off, I so agree with you about reading out loud. I believe that reading out loud, whether it's something as simple as an email or your social media post or the blurb on the back of the book or a dialogue in particular, the more you read it out loud, you're going to catch things. You're going to hear where something was a word that you thought you used and maybe it was the wrong word, or maybe there's a typo. But when you read the actual word that's there, like you might read something and you said it's through, oh no, but the word there is thorough, two different words, but just a little nuance there. It could have been an accident, a typo, but still, or autocorrect. and auto-corrected it in the wrong way.
Yeah.
And, so reading out loud is such a valuable tool, and it's so easy to do. So I love that you said that. Plus, I mean, if you have a built-in audience of animals, I mean, hello, there you go.
Yeah.
So when, to your point, so you've got the book. So we're shifting gears a little bit from sci-fi into mystery, but and thriller, but still the same concept. When you wrote the draft, you built your outline, you realized I need to really do some restructuring, some high level restructuring. I need to physically move scenes, move chapters around. So this has re-racked the outline. So do you build a new outline?
Oh yeah. Every change I make in my story, I put it in the outline, because my outline to me is just basically my novel in miniature. Right. So I've got to be able to follow it. I've got to be able to see what's going on. Yeah.
So how do you get to know your characters?
Usually after the second rewrite, I know I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
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 I don't do a whole lot of research into my characters until after I've got the basic story down. And yes, that means I do have to do some changes, because sometimes it turns out, well, she's not going to do that. So that can't happen. But yeah, either that or I have to invent a reason why she would do that.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But I mean, sometimes you can tell, like in that first draft, the writer is getting to know the character, and the character's getting to know what this writer is doing. But usually the character's like, thank you, writer, but I'm driving this show, not you. So just pay attention to what I'm telling you or what I'm doing. So the first pass is really you figuring out what you want it to be, what you think that story is going to entail, the genre, the elements that would show up in said genre, but also getting to know that character. So going back to this outline, which I seriously love this, and your character, is there something that runs parallel that kind of shows the character arcing, in the sense of the characters at this point at the beginning, by this point, so to your point, the build of tension and the strength of the book, and as it's starting to go in a certain arc, do you have something that runs parallel that helps to show the character structuring, or are those notes in the outline that detailed enough for you to see that?
Well, my notes are in the outline,
Yeah.
but they're in a different color.
Okay.
So
Okay.
for example, in this one, which is the second book into this series, I have the bad guy is in blue. And of course, my main character, Sylvia, she's in black, unless I need to make changes, in which case she's in red. So, but
Nice.
the bad guy, you never really see. It's just behind the scenes. So I know where he is and what he's doing and like that.
But you need to. And
Yeah.
Sylvia doesn't need to. So that's
No.
important. Right. So,
Right.
but that's such an important part, that when you have characters that need to be formidable, especially an antagonist, and you need it to be a very strong and believable antagonist. But if they're not in every scene, how do you build that to help create that tension and create that strength in the character? And that's why I really like good thrillers, because you can feel that, and you can, and a lot of times you feel that through the protagonist, because the protagonist has a real feeling about what their nemesis is, who they're dealing with, and you get kind of shaped through that perspective in a sense. Would you,
Yeah.
take it you agree?
Yeah. No, I agree completely. I think, yeah, like you said, if you write just your main character and you don't keep track of your background characters who aren't the point of view characters, then you're going to lose the tension, right? Even if you don't write that character in that scene, he's there. He's always there.
So I would love for you to talk a little bit about the writing process in a slightly different way. So you've fleshed out a very rough skeleton, I like to call them, where you just kind of get the idea, you get it all out so that you have something from beginning to end conceptually to work with. Because it's as cool as it is to go from a nothing, nothing on the page, just a blinking cursor, to something. You still need something on the page to start to edit, to refine, to strengthen. So you get that first pass done. The outline starts to show up. the rewrites, the outline, the rewrites, the outline. All of that's happening kind of with a nice little ebb and flow. So you shared with me before we started recording that you write about an hour a day.
Yeah,
I would
roughly
love
about
for
an
you to talk
hour.
about how this all comes together, because I think sometimes when you are writing, and if you can dedicate hours and hours, by all means do so. But there's also a threshold that you reach of this is what I can dedicate with my best energy in this too. And that's going to help keep that piece moving and your interest moving. So would you talk about your process in that way?
Oh, well, I think what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for everyone, but I hope people can get ideas based on what I do. I spend, like you said, about an hour writing or rewriting or whatever until I just can't stomach it anymore, which isn't very long, sadly. But I spend a good part of the day, I think, just letting it ebb and flow through me. I don't really think about it. I don't really pursue it, but I just kind of live in a cloud of it. I don't know if that makes sense, where it just kind of, and that's the nice thing about continuing to work on the same book all the time, because you can live in that book and you can live in that story and you can see and feel what's coming up and what's going wrong. A lot of this editing and writing is so much gut level stuff, right? Feeling it. And so that's what I do. I spend the day just feeling where the story is and where it wants to go, and who wants to talk, and like that. So yeah, and then I come back in the morning and I have an idea. And sometimes my hour of writing, I get, that much.
Like a paragraph, maybe.
Yeah, and then I'm stalled and I'm just like, well, this should have gone better. But sometimes I get a lot. And I try to always stop where I'm working at an exciting point. I don't like to stop at the end of a scene, because then it's hard to pick up again.
Oh, I love that point, that you're not,
Yeah.
it's about, this is exciting. Where's this going to go next? And so that momentum is building. But you make a really strong point about when you are, just because you're not sitting down at the keyboard or pencil, pen to paper, and literally writing word for word. I mean, obviously that's an extension of what's necessary to create a book. However, a lot of it is letting it run through your mind and saying, okay, what's happening? And sometimes you're not necessarily focused on, now I have to go think about this. You're actually doing something else, like cooking a dinner or driving someplace else, or you're at the grocery store and all of a sudden this random idea hits you. When those things happen, and they happen to me all the time, even when I'm editing somebody else's project, I'm like, oh my gosh, and I'll voice it into my phone so I can make sure I go back and look at it from that perspective, or that thing that was on my mind. Let me jot this down. So I turn my phone, like the notes app, on and voice everything in just to make sure I capture it. And then I can go back to doing whatever it was, or I keep a pencil and a notepad with me and jot it down so I don't lose it. Is that something you do too when those things are happening?
I do. I have a notepad that I write in. I actually keep a regular journal that gets filled up fairly quickly, actually. But I've learned to trust myself, that I've thought of something once, I'm going to think of it again. And that's also important too, as a writer, to trust yourself, to trust your writing process.
Yes. Yes. I love
Yeah.
that. And so one of the things I'm hearing is that, and I really think this is cool, you're multi-genre. There's sci-fi, there's mystery, thriller, mystery, and those require different elements, different genres, but you're using something very similar to help you create the book, the story in both cases, that roughing it out and then using the outline. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't need their own nuances in different pieces. And it doesn't mean that each book, even in its own genre, might still look and feel a little different with how that process worked. But I love that what you described is something that can kind of be a framework for you whenever you want to pick up, I want to write a rom-com. Well, you still need to have, there's certain beats, there's certain things you need to see in those. You can do the same thing in that totally different genre, but I could You could do that with what you have described for your writing style.
I also have some fantasy books out there
Yes.
too. So some romantic fantasy books. And you're right, they are different. The beats are sometimes in different places in them, but there are specific points you have to hit. And with my outline, I know that by, for example, chapter 20 or scene 20, more specifically, I have to have the first major plot twist by
Mhm.
scene 20. It's got to be there. So if it's not there and it's way out, 35 or something like that, I'm not doing my job.
I
So,
love that. I
yeah.
love that so much because what I hear you doing is thinking about the reader's experience. You're really thinking about how do I bring this reader in,
Mhm.
going back to, are they going to put it down if it's not plausible? Because even when you're creating fantasy, a thriller, there's a rom-com, it needs to feel plausible in some way, or you're suspending some disbelief in a sense, but that's why you also picked up the book, was because there was an escape it created for you. But there's still elements of it needs to have enough tension, enough pieces in there to make it feel like, what's going to happen next? Oh my gosh, I'm
Mhm.
rooting for this character, or I'm rooting against this character. What's going to
Yeah.
happen? And that's what you're also describing, is the tension, is the conflict, helping to make sure that that reader gets pulled through and is intrigued, is enjoying the escape that you've created for them.
That's it exactly. They need to be able to escape. They need to be swept away by it. And if you're not doing your job as a writer, if your beats, your elements that are important to your reader, if they're not in a good place for your reader, you're going to lose them, and they're not going to get swept away, which means A, they're not going to enjoy it, B, they're not going to buy another book from you, and C, they probably will never ever remember your name.
So let me ask you this. How might a writer know that they are on the right path? Do you have any tips that would help them to know, I think I'm doing what I should be? Like to your point, they might know when something's off because they can tell it's dragging to get to that point, whether they've gotten feedback from a beta reader, or they've, an editor, or just them going back through and self-editing, going, this is dragging. But how do they know? How can they kind of do a little quality check on themselves to go, hey, I'm on the right path. This feels good. I know I'm getting there.
That's a very difficult question. And sometimes as a writer, you don't necessarily see it. It takes someone else seeing it to let you know. I belong to two different writers groups, one of which is local, and there's a very wonderful writer in there. She's kind of a writing partner with me. And so we share our stories and our ideas back and forth. The other group, they just listen to me read my story, and they'll tell me, oh, this is how can she do that, or it's too slow here, you lost my interest. Or I watch them because it's on Zoom. I watch them, and if they go and do something else, I'm like, well, lost that one.
I love how you've just described that, then, because what you're saying is, yes, you've written so many passes and you've done so much between you and the page itself, just between you and the page, and that's it. But you found the right time for yourself, recognizing, I think I need to open this up and get some feedback to make sure. So that really goes back to your point about trusting yourself. If you get that feeling that I think something's off, what is it? Trusting yourself to follow that nudge and see where it goes. Ask a trusted confidant, a trusted resource to help you to flesh that out, because the writing group you trust, that critique group you trust, and in some cases you got what you needed by body language, and that's powerful. That's an amazing tip. That because sometimes you're listening for the words, or you're wanting somebody to tell you, but maybe they've showed you, and
Yeah.
that's just as powerful.
Yeah, and as writers, we're natural students of body language of other people, and how they act and move, and so it's an easy way to follow it.
Wendy, this has been awesome. Congratulations on your latest book. This
Thank
is
you.
so cool. So cool. Thank you so much for being on the show. Where
Thank
can
you.
people connect with you? Where can they get your books? Where can they find all about you?
I have a website. It's wendylkoenig.com. I'm on Amazon. I'm on Goodreads. I'm on all kinds of social media. So Facebook, Twitter, all that. So
Awesome. Awesome. Wendy, thank you so very much for being on the show. This has been so much fun.
I have had a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.